Amar Shunar Bangla. This is a song that my mom used to try and teach me because it's the anthem for Bangladesh, My Golden Bengal. And I'd always just say, this isn't my song. I've never been to Bangladesh. I don't really know Bangladesh. Why is this the song that I need to learn? I don't know the words. I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know how to sing it. And it was written by a guy called Tagore, who's like the one poet in Bangladesh that I knew. 1913, he was he became the poet laureate for the Nobel Prize for Literature. But trying to sing this song, or try to understand it, I didn't feel like it belonged to me. And there was a certain, I didn't say it to my mom, but there was a certain sense of shame in a way of this backward-looking culture that I thought, is backward-looking Islam, backward-looking religion, trying to get me to learn Arabic without even telling me what it meant. And then, Tagore, and even then, Tagore was actually born in Calcutta, so he's born in a part of Bengal, which has been split in two anyway. So, Bangladesh had become this country without its literary heart, and so we'd lost even that in a way. So I was wanting to follow the dream of Europe, this noble place of freedom and freedom from oppression, Magna Carta, the story of the levelers and diggers, the story of liberty and equality and equal opportunities. And that was where that's where my vision, that's where my sense of myself was. And then, the Brexit referendum happened in 2016, which was a massive shift for me. Just a bit about my history. So I was born in Leeds. I was born in the same place where 2 of the 7/7 bombers were from, in Beeston, in Leeds. Quite a deprived community. My whole life is about running away from where I was born, running away from that history. Became a lawyer in London, to escape the sense of history. But Brexit somehow brought a different sense. Like, what is it? The lies and the duplicity that was happening, the very stories that I was trying to follow of freedom, of truth, seemed to be a lie. These lies of flooding immigrants from Turkey, the money from the NHS, all to gain power. And that seemed to be the story that was there, this story of gaining power. And that's suddenly it sort of like clicked, the kind of the connection to what was happening, or the ancestral story of Bangladesh, and this story that was happening in England with Brexit. And it was the 70th anniversary of the split of India and Bangladesh in 2017. And I was just chopping some vegetables, and I heard, it's an excerpt from the radio, and it was a villager who was talking about his experiences in Bangladesh, in India before the partition. And he said, before the partition, we were just farmers on our land, and we didn't really think about whether we were Hindu or Muslim. We just worked on our land, and when it was Eid, the Muslims gave us sweets, and when it was the Hindu festivals, we gave sweets to the Muslims, and it was all fine. And then something shifted, and that's what brought the story to me of like in England. This before Brexit, we weren't thinking of ourselves as Remainers or Leavers. But these stories that we get told that begin to divide us and that begin the process of hate and begin the process of separation, there was something in there about the same story about gaining and keeping in power that really brought it to my mind. And it was kind of a jolt to know. As a lot, it was, and one of the stories there was about Cyril Radcliffe, who was the Boundaries Commissioner in England, and how he never been to India, and went to India and drew this line that separated, and people had to move from one country to the other, not really even noticing. He burnt all his papers before he came back to England and became Sir Cyril Radcliffe. And it was that jolt, I guess, from this story about Second World War. I learnt about the Industrial Revolution, Jethro Tull, and the spinning jenny. And then here was this story around 2 generations ago. I had no idea what this story was about, really. I didn't really, and yet my blood was connected to the story. Why I was here was connected very much to those stories. The aftermath of those lines that were drawn. And, being a lawyer, I've worked with boundary commissioners. I know these kind of grey level sort of ways of working that somehow lead to these huge shifts in culture. And it made me sort of think around the story of Jane Eyre, because the story of Bertha in the attic, who was, Jane Eyre, you've got the main story of the love, but he was married beforehand, and then when she found out, Jane found out that he was married before, he was like, oh, but she's a mad woman, she's mad, I don't want to be with her, I want to be with you. And then Jean Rhys wrote a book called The Wide Sargasso Sea, which was about the lost story, the story of the mad woman left in the attic, and that sort of brought up this whole sort of feminist story of those stories that are left behind. And I began thinking, what is it, the story that what's my madman in the cellar? Because I could feel some aspect of me beginning to see the outlines of this madman in the cellar that had been not heard, that I had shoved away in myself. These stories of us being displaced diaspora in a way, madness coming out in the bombings of the 7/7. My brothers, one goes to Oxford, one other to Cambridge, but yet mental health problems, sort of myself as well, we're all three of us have these mental health issues. And it's not just an issue of individuality, but it felt there was an issue of our collective stories not being told in some way. And out of that came this process of unbecoming, this anger of learning, of feeling into these stories that are not told. And this is the poem that came out of that, because it's like a process of unbecoming what culture trying to make us, and then trying to grasp and find the seeds of a new story. And that's why I was trying to call this story Rewilding Our Psyches, because it's about extinctions of cultures, and where can we find the beginnings of new cultures in the marginal spaces that could come out. So this poem is called Unbecoming Me. My mother told me I was a good Muslim boy. That was a lie from her. My teachers made me believe I had no colour. That was a lie from them. So I saw no colour, painting myself out of existence. And that was a lie from me. Who then am I? I'm not a terrorist. I'm not a Muslim. I'm neither Christian, Hindu, nor you. I am just me. Britain is breaking, creaking under the weight of lie on lie untold, generation after generation. I'm neither Christian, Hindu, no, I'm neither English, Welsh, Scottish, nor Irish. So do it then, explode me, tear me to bits, throw me to the hounds until chewed and digested, I can become something I never was. And that for me is trying to find this, as Bertha, this lost woman, what is the lost story, and begin to face these stories and actually trying to unearth them and bring them out into these identities that are not being told. So what is it that we can become together through finding new stories? And Extinction Rebellion is about finding a new story about us together through leadership from places of collapse, acknowledging that this civilization is collapsing, the story of modernity is breaking down, and yet I'm interested in the interstitial spaces, the spaces in the margins, the stories that are, when the dinosaurs died out, in those spaces between were the beginnings of the mammals that were living in the tiny little spaces that became the new species. And it's almost, what is it in the between spaces as we, as people of color, of second generation, third generation, identities begin to grow up? What are we finding in these stories that we can join together from our hearts, the head, and the hand? One of the stories, for me, is the Quran. Again, another story that I was didn't want anything to do with, religion, Islam, but I began thinking again, if the monster is actually our projections, it's not what it is, it's how we relate to that story. What would it look like if I related to the Quran on my own terms and began to read it for myself, to view it without my own projections? And actually I found this teacher who said to me, the Quran is like a lover, and she reveals herself when you open your heart to her. And there was this verse that I came across in Surah 22. And it says, so have they not traveled through the earth and have hearts by which to reason and ears by which to hear? For Indeed, it is not eyes that are blinded, but blinded are the hearts which are within the breasts. And what stood out for me there is about the hearts by which to reason, that we orientate our reason through our hearts. And in the abstract, this sense of this quality of decoloniality, I've heard there's a definition of it that says that it's about long-standing patterns of power that emerged as a result of colonialism, but that define culture, labor, and knowledge production. So these things, culture, labor, and knowledge production. Knowledge production, that's our universities that have made themselves into businesses to carry out a particular understanding of a pattern of power. Labor, again, the idea of the worker or employer and the employee relationship, again, following a particular pattern of power. And culture, our desire for this individuality, our freedom from the things that constrain us, the fulfillment of our desires equals happiness. Again, another pattern of power that has banished you could say, the feminine wisdom, the wisdom that tries to not just follow a power over, but a power with. Imagine being in this jungle, sort of in the middle of the night, and there are birds, and there's the hooting of sounds and monkeys, and it's a cacophony of sound that just means it takes you away from this human story that we are so important, into this place where it's never even heard the human story or the human sound, and these tiny places that are still living now, and they're being destroyed, in the Amazon and so on. And we hear the stories of the Amazons being cut down or burnt, but we don't hear the sounds of those places. We don't really feel what it means. We don't have a sense of what it means. And sitting in that place came this poem for me, which is about trying to bring that sense of the forest and the woods back to these places in Europe. And it's and this is called India's Songs to the West. Ancient cries, low and sweet, hang in this ancient jungle, still living its dream. Here the green man lives on, his roots tied and tangled to the presence of the earth, bursting through heart, mouth, nose, and ears, holding solid his thoughts like roots to soil. Bring back the green man to these western shores. Let sky meet earth once more. And it's just it's trying to bring back a story of nature untamed, nature that is back into its primordial sort of quality. And it's connected to this, another place that was colonized is Scotland. And I was sitting in nature, just trying to hear what stories were in the land that could, what is it that needs to be said. And what came to me was, you're still asking for stories. You've taken all the trees and all the wilderness, and all that is left are these bare, empty hills that you call this pristine wilderness. But actually, this is nature denuded of its qualities, and you're still asking for a story. And so it was like, how do we begin to learn to love the earth again as well, and find a different story? So in the old song, we have this story of predict and control, of taming nature, this separation from land that has led us to being in factories, to being in cities, this extractive technology that is asking us for self-individuation. Everything is about ourself, like, what can I gain in myself? How can I develop myself? And the dream of this automation of life. And in the new song, what I was hearing in the jungle, was this archetype of the green man that was calling out for a place, being rooted in place, this responsibility that we have to the whole, to the freedom that comes from our responsibility when we're rooted, and to uproot that old dream, to become, in a way, barbarian citizens. It's kind of how I felt it, and that's why I feel Extinction Rebellion is representing this quality of citizenship, being of the city, but being barbarian, being a quality of trying to uproot the old stories. And this is a poem that came from that place of trying to hear the story of the ancient feminine wisdom, the serpent that we've banned and made it into the evil, or Eve and the symbol of the evil, when it used to be a symbol of ancient wisdom. So this poem is trying to call back that power. After generations of take it, grab it, it's mine for keeps, now standing, emptied of meaning, stroking the beard in grim ways, knowing the way of old bone that sorely say, our time is up. They say, time to die wise. What? I haven't even lived yet, says she. There are songs soaked in the earth yet to be sung, not sourced from man. To die is given to all, to live well to few. So the serpent, wrapped around slumbering song lines, wakens. Feel her coils take hold of limb and life. They are agony and grief and fire. And there's a sense for me of these new stories, the thunder of new stories, that we are trying to erupt from this earth that has become concrete and asphalt. This idea of being barbarian citizens, the word barbarian comes from the Greek, from the sound of barber. They used to say, oh, barbers. Barbers were the Persians and the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, making these unintelligible sounds outside the city walls of civilization. The exclusion we create to say, this is civilized, this is barbar, this is barbarian, this is outside. So we need to begin to bring the new sounds, the new song into the city walls. And that sound and that song for me was just last week was Cambridge, XR Cambridge did this amazing action that is a new story in a way. What they did is that there is this lawn in Trinity College. The old song, Newton sees an apple falling, makes a story of cause, not only a story of cause and effect, but the capacity of humans to come together and predict and control our surroundings and our material world. So Trinity College lawn represents this tamed nature, the Anthropocene, that nature is submitted to human will, and it becomes then our sacred cow, this watered garden, this watered lawn, this manicured, this place of no walking, this place of power and privilege, while around us there are food banks and civilizational collapse, but this is the sacred cow. And they uprooted that. They dug into the earth. They kissed the earth with their shovels and said, this earth is greater than our idols that we've created. They kissed the earth with their shovels and uprooted 400 years of power and privilege and the history of this story of predict and control, trying and asking for a covenant of renewal with our earth. Of course, there's people complaining, and there's been all sorts of violence that is coming because they are trying to create a new story with their shovels. This rebellion for love. And around us we can just see, the hearts, that this rebellion is a story of standing our ground and saying no, but also calling in something new. And what is that new story? And it's like, nature comes in cycles and regenerates as well. And the Quran, again, an old story, talks about the hearts by which to reason. That we have to come through our hearts. And Pope, in the Christian story, Pope Francis used technology to give a TED talk in 2017. And this is what he had to say about love, which I think feels to me, he makes it very material, makes it very real, that it's an extension of our body. So he said, a child's love for mom and dad grows through their touch, their gaze, their voice. It is a love that comes close and becomes real. It is a movement that starts from heart, reaches the eyes, the ears, and the hands. And so we grow into our love. We grow into our love through our feelings, through our bodies, from those nurturing moments as a baby looking up to our mother, and then that connection that we grow through the sounds and the gazes and the feeling of it. And how can we love the earth when it's buried under concrete and asphalt and manicured lawns? And so we need to kiss the earth with these shovels to begin to unearth and begin to bring out this quality of being a barbarian in the city. And these are just ancient stories of, of radical love that came from Jesus. But, we have the stories in Jesus upturning the temple, Muhammad as well, like making a rebellion for his story that came through the Quran, and the Pope as well, extending this story of love. And of course, then the establishment will reach for violence. And the barbarians, we must, begin to make our love intelligible to that story. We can't just continuously. We need to make what it is that we're doing. Like what, there are many people talking about exiles. Cambridge actions as if, it was a violence. Like, why did you dig up the earth? That's nature, and you've dug up nature, and then you're saying you're representing nature. And they're angry. There was yesterday, some people put on Twitter that they were going to go out and beat the crap out of these people who think they're higher. So there's this violence that is emerging from the establishment, or the establishment is setting the conditions to allow the violence to emerge. We need to begin to make the citizens welcome the barbarian voice, to begin to hear what the barbarians are saying, in a way, and then kind of end this part and open it to questions, because it's again when I started about my mother, because her love for me was unintelligible to me. She was telling me all the time to love Bangladesh, and I didn't know what she was saying. I was fighting for my own story about Britain and the liberal humanist story. And I began to try to hear her story, to try to hear her grief about when I began to try to learn to hear her grief, something else changed inside me, to not to try to keep putting my perspective over, but to try to hear what she was saying, and to say, I won't look away from her grief, because there's a kind of fragility, a kind of, when we hear, in our emotions, we keep trying to run away from things that we find uncomfortable. And how do we begin to stay with those uncomfortable feelings and try to listen? And this is a poem that I wrote, just try to represent this feeling towards my mother. But it kind of extends it into Extinction Rebellion as well, because it's a symbol of the boat that we have in Extinction Rebellion as well. And this song talks about a boat, and this poem. Refugees from the mainstream, because that's in a way what we are as we become these citizen barbarians. We're moving away from the mainstream, but trying to find a new story to rewild the stories that have died. I made my boat from tic-tac tape, bits of alder found on river streams, abandoned with Buckfast brew and lager cans. I left mother and brother standing on the shore, perplexed at the ragtag thing I had become. I will not say sorry. I will not say I am wrong, and I will not look away. I will hold your grief in the palm of my hand. I have to go now where I don't know. The call in the whisper of winds, the rustle of reeds haunts my heart. I abandon models of predict and control taught by this Western machine. Carry me forth on my boat of dreams, imagine a law, the language of folks like you and me. I made my boat from tic-tac tape, bits of alder found on river streams, abandoned with Buckfast brew and lager cans. I'll not say I am wrong. I'll not say sorry. And I will not look away. I will hold your grief in the palm of my hand. And that for me is what we need to do. We will not look away. We need to hold the grief that is coming in the palm of our hands, and through that agency to find a way of bringing a story of rewilded love from all of us. Thank you.